He believed she was just another black woman he could easily pressure, unaware that she would soon enter a courtroom and dismantle his career. The highway stretched out sparsely populated that evening. Only a few vehicles passed, their headlights reflecting off the moist asphalt. Street lamps flickered erratically, casting lengthy, dancing shadows across the road outside Birmingham, Alabama. It was late, just after 11 p.m., an hour when most people are simply focused on reaching home. Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson had been driving for roughly 2 hours. Her fingers tapped a gentle rhythm on the steering wheel as she quietly sang along to the smooth notes of vintage jazz playing from her car's speakers. She wasn't wearing her uniform, just a simple black sweater and jeans, her hair neatly tied back. She aimed not to attract attention, or so she thought. Then, in her rearview mirror, she spotted the lights, red and blue, flashing urgently, closing the distance quickly. A knot formed in her stomach, not from fear. She was familiar with situations like this, but from weariness. She activated her turn signal, merged into the adjacent lane, and guided her car onto the shoulder. Putting the car in park, she drew a deliberate breath and kept both hands clearly visible. Years in the military had ingrained the protocol. A white patrol car pulled up closely behind her. The officer exited unhurriedly. When he finally emerged, he moved with an air of expecting compliance, heavy boots scraping the pavement, one hand resting near his belt, the other holding a flashlight that ignited as he approached. She turned her head slightly, observing him in her side mirror. The name badge reflected the light. Briggs. License and registration. No initial greeting, no explanation offered. His tone was level, routine, and devoid of patience. Renee met his gaze in the mirror, then slowly reached into the glove compartment for her documents. "Was I exceeding the speed limit, officer?" she inquired, her voice steady. Briggs didn't respond immediately. He took the papers, holding them slightly out of her reach while he surveyed her vehicle. "Taillights are out," he stated. She furrowed her brow. "That doesn't seem right." Briggs finally directed his attention to her. "Are you trying to argue with me?" A brief silence hung in the air. Renee sensed the subtle shift, that quiet, charged instant where authority confronted resistance, and one side anticipated the other yielding. She had encountered it before, in mission briefings, during training simulations designed to prepare service members for civilian interactions. She knew better than to escalate unnecessarily, but she also understood her entitlements. "I'm simply mentioning," she responded calmly, "that my taillights were checked a few weeks ago. However, if there's an issue, I'll arrange for repairs." "Step out of the vehicle," Briggs interrupted, as if he hadn't heard her at all. Renee slowly let out her breath. She glanced towards the traffic moving past. No onlookers. She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel once before reaching for the door handle. "May I ask why?" she requested. Briggs tilted his head slightly, a smirk playing on his lips. "'Cause I said so." She allowed his words to hang in the air for a moment, then unfastened her seatbelt and pushed the door open. The night air felt cooler than anticipated. She stepped onto the pavement, her stance composed but cautious. She wasn't seeking confrontation, but she wouldn't be easily intimidated. Briggs took a step back, his eyes scanning her. She could sense him assessing her, calculating how far he could push. "Turn around." Hands on the car. This time, she hesitated. "For what reason?" Briggs took a step closer, his smirk vanishing. "Are you resisting?" Renee stood her ground. "No, I'm asking a question." A fleeting expression crossed his face. Irritation, amusement, perhaps both. Then, without warning, he reached for his radio. "Got a non-compliant driver here," he mumbled into the device, then spoke louder. "Turn around." Her heart rate increased, but her expression remained calm. "Officer, there's something you need to understand," she stated, her voice quiet but firm. "I am fully aware of my rights and your limitations." Briggs clearly disliked this. His jaw tightened. "You're under arrest," he snapped, reaching for her wrist. Renee reacted instantly, stepping back just enough to evade his grasp. "Under arrest for what?" Briggs produced his handcuffs. "For obstructing an officer." She let out a sharp breath through her nose. So that was his plan. Her military training took over. Her heartbeat remained steady, her breathing controlled. She knew she had two options: comply and challenge this later, or resist and risk further escalation. She refused to become another statistic. With slow, deliberate movements, she turned and placed her hands on the roof of her car. The cool metal felt grounding beneath her palms. Briggs wasted no time, yanking her arms behind her back, tightening the cuffs excessively before pushing her towards the patrol car. "You don't know what you're getting into," she murmured. Briggs chuckled, shoving her into the back seat. "Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing." But he was profoundly mistaken. The unyielding plastic seat of the patrol car pressed into her back. Renee remained still, her wrists aching from the tight cuffs, her breathing even. The door slammed shut, enclosing her. Outside, Briggs swaggered back to his vehicle, muttering into his radio. She looked at the divider separating her from the front compartment. The faint reflection of her face stared back, calm, composed, yet a quiet fury simmered beneath the surface. She had endured combat exercises, high-stakes missions, and interrogations in foreign lands. But this was different. This involved a man wielding a badge, intoxicated by authority, convinced of his own invincibility. A few minutes passed, then 5, then 10. She subtly shifted her hands, testing the restraint. Far too tight. He had intended it. The driver's side door swung open, and Briggs slid inside, whistling softly. Well, he mumbled, fastening his seatbelt. "Let's take a little drive." She offered no reply. He shifted the car into gear, pulling off the shoulder and back onto the main road. The patrol car lurched forward, its overhead lights still flashing. She could see the reflection of the red and blue lights in the side mirrors, painting the road behind them. "You know," Briggs began after a pause, "most folks just keep quiet when I tell them to step out." Renee exhaled sharply through her nose. "And most officers don't arrest people for asking questions during a traffic stop." Briggs laughed, shaking his head. "Lady, you must seriously believe you're special." She looked at him through the partition. "I don't believe I know." That remark caused him to hesitate, just for an instant. His knuckles tightened on the steering wheel, a flicker of annoyance piercing his smug facade. But he quickly regained his composure. "You military?" he asked, his tone abruptly shifting. She didn't answer. "Yeah, figured," he continued. "You got that attitude, that above-the-law vibe." He smirked. "Bet you thought flashing that around would make me back off, huh?" She remained silent. Briggs clicked his tongue. "Shame," he mused, shaking his head. "If you'd just kept your mouth shut, none of this would have happened." Her jaw tightened at his presumption, as if his actions were somehow her fault. The station came into view ahead, a low, gray brick structure just off the primary road. The parking lot was largely empty. Late-night processing moved slowly, and for now, it seemed she was the only one being brought in. Briggs pulled into a reserved spot near the entrance, cut the engine, and turned to face her through the partition. "Gotta admit," he murmured, "I love it when they make things easy." Before she could react, he was out of the car, slamming the door shut. A second later, her door swung open. "Let's move," he commanded. Renee subtly twisted her wrists as she stepped out. The cuffs dug into her skin. He hadn't eased them at all. She kept her head held high as he escorted her inside, past a weary-looking desk sergeant, and into the processing area. The holding space carried the scent of stale coffee and perspiration. A metal bench lined the far wall, a steel door leading to the cells located just beyond. Briggs removed the cuffs just long enough to guide her through the booking procedure. Fingerprints, mugshot, the standard routine. The officers behind the counter barely glanced up, simply going through the motions. She had witnessed this kind of detached indifference before. It was the atmosphere where individuals like Briggs flourished. Once the process concluded, he gripped her wrist again, leading her towards the cells. "Think you're clever, huh?" he muttered under his breath. She glanced sideways. "I don't need to think." His grip tightened. She knew that bothered him. "Enjoy your stay," Briggs sneered, shoving her towards the cell. Renee steadied herself before stumbling. She turned, watching as the metal bars slid into place between them. Briggs smirked from the other side, lightly tapping the bars with his fingers before walking away. The lock clicked shut. She took a slow breath, then sank onto the bench. The cold metal seeped through her jeans, a stark reality. One night. That's all it would require. Because Briggs had no conception of the individual he had just provoked. The metal bench was unyielding, cold, and uncomfortable. Renee shifted slightly, rolling her shoulders to alleviate the growing stiffness. The cell itself was minimal. For walls, a single flickering light fixture, and the faint, lingering odor of old sweat and disinfectant. She had spent nights in considerably harsher environments, places where the danger wasn't merely discomfort, but a genuine threat. This was nothing in comparison. Yet, that didn't diminish her anger. Through the bars, she could faintly hear the low murmur of officers speaking at the front desk, the occasional rustle of paper, the clink of a coffee cup against a surface. She exhaled slowly and steadily. Control the breathing, control the mind. It was a lesson drilled into her during basic training, long before she ever joined the fleet. Then heavy footsteps. Briggs. She recognized his gait before he even came into view, that same arrogant rhythm, the walk of a man convinced of his own impunity. He appeared in front of the cell a second later, arms folded across his chest, the familiar smirk fixed on his face. Comfortable. She didn't respond. He tilted his head, stepping closer to the bars. You know, if you'd just gone along with it, you wouldn't be spending the night in here right now. A slow smile touched the corners of her lips. Oh, I'm precisely where I need to be. Briggs's smirk wavered for a fleeting moment, a flicker of annoyance or uncertainty in his eyes. He quickly masked it, scoffing as he glanced towards the empty, holding area. Nobody's coming to bail you out tonight, lady. He shrugged. Guess that means you'll have plenty of time to reconsider that attitude. Renee simply watched him, outwardly unaffected. Briggs leaned in slightly. Look, he continued, lowering his voice. People like you seem to think the rules don't apply. You believe a bit of confidence is enough to bypass consequences. She allowed him to speak, to ramble. It was inconsequential because he remained unaware of what was coming. Then, as if on cue, another officer approached from the corridor. He was younger, likely in his late 20s, wearing a standard duty uniform. He stopped a few feet away, holding a clipboard. Sergeant? The officer's voice held a slight note of hesitation. We received a call. Briggs barely glanced in his direction. The younger officer paused, shifting his weight. And I think you need to examine this. Briggs frowned, then gave Renee one final look before stepping away. She sat back, listening. The conversation was hushed, but she managed to catch fragments. Something about legal counsel, a contact from higher authority, questions regarding the reason for her detention. Briggs's voice lowered further, sharp with irritation. The younger officer stammered a response, but whatever he said didn't seem to please Briggs. Then the sound of heavy footsteps again. Briggs stormed back, his jaw clenched tight, hands formed into fists at his sides. His smirk was completely gone. What in the world did you do? Renee leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I didn't do anything. She tilted her head slightly. But information travels. And some of us have allies in very influential positions. Briggs's face darkened. She could see the dawning realization, the recognition that the power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer in control. He spun around on his heel, muttering something unintelligible, and vanished back down the corridor. Renee exhaled. It wouldn't be much longer now. And when the full truth emerged, Briggs would deeply regret every decision that had led him to this precise moment. Morning light filtered through the narrow courthouse windows, painting long streaks across the gleaming floors. The air inside felt sharp, the kind of cold that settled deep within if you remained still for too long. Renee stood near the defense table, her posture relaxed, yet her gaze sharp. She was no longer restrained by handcuffs, wore no orange uniform, and was free from a holding cell. Instead, She was dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer over a simple blouse, exuding an undeniable presence. She wasn't alone. Beside her, her attorney, Carla Whitman, methodically reviewed a stack of documents, barely looking up as people gradually entered the courtroom. Whitman was efficient and focused, with no unnecessary movements or idle conversation. Renee appreciated that. The substantial wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Briggs entered. He still carried himself with an air of someone who commanded the space, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised. But there was a noticeable difference now, a stiffness in his stride, a subtle uncertainty in his expression that hadn't been there before. He seemed less confident. Renee caught his eye. He quickly looked away. Good. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Judge Alan Kirkland, an older man with a weary demeanor, adjusted his glasses before settling into his seat. He wasted no time. All right, he sighed, glancing over the case files. Let's proceed. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with meticulously styled hair, cleared his throat. Your Honor, we have compelling evidence to suggest that the defendant, Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson, was unlawfully detained without probable cause. Furthermore, new information indicates a pattern of official misconduct involving the arresting officer, Sergeant Daniel Briggs. A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. Briggs shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening. The judge peered at him over his spectacles. Sergeant Briggs, would you care to provide an explanation? Briggs leaned forward, clearing his throat. Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop. The prosecutor interrupted him. Uncooperative. He turned, lifting a document from the table. Lieutenant Commander Dawson's record demonstrates a distinguished military career, a graduate of the Naval Academy, multiple commendations, absolutely no criminal history, and no prior citations. Are you suggesting that despite this exemplary background, she posed such a threat that you felt compelled to arrest her over a potentially malfunctioning taillight? Briggs began to speak, then closed his mouth. The silence lingered. The prosecutor continued, flipping through his papers. Additionally, an internal review of your arrest records reveals a disproportionately high number of traffic stops involving black drivers within this district. The murmuring in the room intensified. Briggs's face flushed darkly. Judge Kirkland placed his file down with a sigh. Sergeant, I find these allegations deeply concerning. Briggs leaned back, crossing his arms. She resisted. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. The body camera footage indicates otherwise. Another wave of hushed reactions swept through the courtroom. Briggs looked at the judge, his tone suddenly more defensive. I was adhering to standard procedure. Judge Kirkland was clearly unconvinced. He glanced towards the bailiff. Let's view the footage. A screen lowered at the front of the courtroom, and a video began to play. Renee didn't turn to watch. She had already experienced it firsthand. Briggs barking orders, her own calm replies, the unnecessary escalation, the arrogant way he tightened the handcuffs. The courtroom was utterly silent when the video concluded. Judge Kirkland leaned forward, pressing his fingertips together. Sergeant Briggs, you clearly violated established protocol. You conducted an unlawful arrest. And you failed to accurately report the full circumstances in your initial statement. Briggs opened his mouth, but the judge wasn't finished. The charges against Lieutenant Commander Dawson are hereby dismissed. His gavel struck the bench sharply and definitively. And I strongly recommend a thorough internal investigation into Sergeant Briggs's conduct. The tension in the room dissipated suddenly, like a released spring. Briggs looked as though he had been physically struck. His face was bright red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Renee simply exhaled slowly, her composure intact. She had never harbored any doubt. As she gathered her belongings, she glanced towards Briggs one final time. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Because this time, she wasn't the one whose reputation was on the line. That burden now rested squarely on Briggs. Briggs stormed out of the courtroom, his heavy footsteps echoing down the polished corridors. His face remained rigid, his jaw set. He could feel the eyes of others on him, fellow officers, court personnel, even the reporters who had arrived once news of a case had spread. He was unaccustomed to this scrutiny. He was used to exerting control, to entering a space and commanding either respect or fear. But now, the authority he had always taken for granted felt like sand slipping through his grasp. Then came the inevitable blow. Sergeant Briggs. A sharp voice cut through the hallway noise. He turned. Chief Eldon Baker stood with his arms folded, his expression impassive. The older man had served on the force for over 3 decades, a respected figure within the department whose words carried significant weight. Briggs straightened. Sir. Baker studied him for a moment, then with a curt nod, motioned for Briggs to follow him into a private office. The moment the door clicked shut, the chief's tone changed. What in God's name were you thinking? Briggs exhaled sharply. I was performing my duty. Your duty? Baker scoffed, tossing a file onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. That's not what this indicates. The body camera footage, your arrest history, the fact that you apparently didn't even know who you were arresting. Briggs's nostrils flared. What relevance does that have? Baker leaned forward. Everything. His voice was low but sharp. This wasn't some random individual. This was a high-ranking Navy officer. You honestly believe this is just going to fade away? Briggs looked away, grinding his teeth. She was disrespectful. She questioned me. Baker cut in. That is not a criminal offense. Briggs scoffed, shaking his head. You just don't understand. People like that. The chief's expression hardened. People like what? Briggs fell silent, swallowing hard but saying nothing. Baker sighed, rubbing his forehead. The district attorney is now reviewing every single one of your cases from the past 5 years. You've been flagged for potential racial profiling, and you can be absolutely certain this department will not be brought down with you. Briggs felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. What exactly does that signify? Baker straightened. It means you are on immediate administrative leave, effective immediately. Internal Affairs is launching a full investigation. And if they discover what I suspect they will find. He shook his head. Your career is finished. The words struck Briggs with the force of a physical blow. His face burned. This is utter. Baker raised a hand. Don't complete that sentence. His voice was like ice. Clear out your workspace. And if I were you, I'd retain legal counsel. Briggs stood there, fists clenched at his sides, his world rapidly falling apart. And for the very first time in his career, he grasped that he was not, in fact, untouchable. Across town, Renee sat in a quiet coffee shop, stirring her drink while scrolling through her phone. The case had already made headlines. The body cam footage had rapidly spread online. Lieutenant Commander wrongfully arrested, officer under investigation. She wasn't surprised. From the moment she had stepped out of her car that night, she had foreseen how this would unfold. She had encountered men like Briggs before, arrogant, entitled, accustomed to manipulating the law to their advantage. But this time, he had miscalculated. Her phone vibrated, a message from her attorney. Briggs suspended. Potential charges pending. Renee took a slow sip of her coffee. Good. She glanced out the window, watching the city's rhythm continue around her. The struggle wasn't over. Not for her, and certainly not for the others Briggs had likely harmed previously. But today was a clear victory. The crisp afternoon air carried the clean scent of recent rain as Renee exited the cafe. The emotional weight of the preceding 24 hours should have felt heavy, but it didn't. She walked with her characteristic confidence, head held high, step steady. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a recognized number. She sighed, then answered. Captain, the familiar voice greeted her. Lieutenant Commander. I assume you've seen the news? I have. A brief pause. And how are you feeling? Renee glanced at her reflection in a nearby shop window. She saw no trace of defeat, no cracks in her composure. I feel, she replied, like I did exactly what needed to be done. The captain's voice softened slightly. That's precisely what I expected you to say. Another pause. The Department of Defense has expressed interest in your case. Don't be surprised if they ask you to speak on it. Renee exhaled through her nose. Not sure I'm keen on becoming a media sensation. You already are, the captain countered. And whether you embrace it or not, what transpired is reflective of a larger systemic issue. She understood that. She had always understood that Briggs wasn't an isolated incident. He was a product of a system that had allowed officers like him to operate without proper oversight for years. This situation transcended her personal experience. It concerned the countless individuals who had faced similar circumstances but lacked the rank, the legal support, or the platform to effectively fight back. Renee leaned against a lamppost, observing the flow of traffic. This isn't the first time something like this has occurred, she commented, and it won't be the last. No, the captain agreed. But it is the first time Briggs is being held accountable. And that's because you refuse to back down. Renee closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of those words sink in. She hadn't backed down. Not when Briggs pulled her over, not when he attempted intimidation, not when the handcuffs tightened painfully around her wrists, not even during the night behind bars, fully aware that the odds were stacked against her. She had remained resolute, and she had prevailed. The captain cleared his throat. One more thing, he added. You might receive a call from the mayor's office. Renee's eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh. Apparently, they wish to commend you for handling the situation with professionalism and grace. She smirked. Now that's ironic. The captain chuckled. Will you accept? Renee considered it for a moment, then shrugged. I'll give it some thought. She ended the call and returned her phone to her pocket. Across the street, a mother walked with her young son, his small hand firmly held in hers. He was laughing about something, carefree and full of life. Renee watched them for a moment, the future generation. She had fought for herself, certainly, but she had also fought for him, for every black child who deserved to grow up in a world where individuals like Briggs couldn't misuse their authority as weapons. She drew a deep breath, then turned and walked away, her steps purposeful, her objective clear. This fight was not solely hers. It never had been. Unchecked power inevitably leads to abuse. The only path to reforming the system is to insist on accountability. What happened to Renee is a daily reality for many, individuals who lack the advantages of rank, connections, or readily available evidence. This is why it is crucial to speak out, to demand change, to refuse to remain silent. If this narrative resonated with you, share it. If it ignited anger, discuss it. And if it underscored how much work remains to be done, stay actively involved, because genuine transformation begins with honest conversations.